Conviction beyond convenience, faith with intentionality. As I read this article, Bill C9 has just received royal assent, meaning it has officially become law in Canada. This bill, popularly known as the Combating Hate Act, has been on my watch list for some time. In fact, it is one of only two bills I've been closely monitoring, the other being Bill C8, popularly known as the Act Respecting Cybersecurity, which sets cybersecurity requirements for critical infrastructure operators. Interestingly, both bills are numbered consecutively and have recently passed, but that is not why they captured my attention. Each one intersects with a different dimension of my life, one impacting my professional responsibilities, the other impacting my faith. While I approached Bill C8 more passively, following developments and understanding its implications for my work, I took a much more active interest in Bill C9. I watched parliamentary committee discussions, read briefs from public interest law firms, and even wrote to my local MP to express my concerns and urge them to consider the bill's potential impact on the practice of my faith. My primary concern, shared by many religious groups, is that by removing the long-standing good faith religious opinions defense, the bill introduces legal uncertainty around how courts may interpret religious expression. In that context, believers may face greater uncertainty about when the public expression of their faith could give rise to legal scrutiny. In a cultural climate that is increasingly sensitive and in some cases resistant to uncomfortable truths, this raises serious concerns for believers who seek to both live out and share their faith. As the bill became law, I felt a growing sense of concern and apprehension about what it might mean for believers. But as I sat with these emotions, I began examining what lay beneath them. I began to reflect on the ways I had been practicing and expressing my faith prior to C9 becoming law that I now feel constrained from doing. Not simply what has been taken away, but how fully I had made use of the freedoms available to me. I asked myself this not to minimize the potential impact of the new law, but to examine my own life, specifically the depth of my commitment to living out and professing my faith publicly. As I reflected, I realized that a subtle but pervasive sense of fear has long characterized my approach to sharing my faith, a fear of retribution that consistently influences my actions. It is a carefully cultivated instinct, one that causes me to retreat whenever I find myself in spaces where my faith feels unwelcome. The natural response then becomes silence, living out my faith privately rather than professing it openly. And if that fear remains unaddressed, the passage of new law changes very little. It simply becomes another layer of constraint, setting boundaries I do not yet have the courage to taste. In that sense, this may already be true for more of us than we would care to admit. But if that is true, then we must ask, should that be the case? Are we called to live carefully curated lives that trade kingdom purpose for personal comfort, pursuing the gospel only while it feels safe, yet retreating at the first sign of discomfort and treading cautiously on matters of faith? I began to realize that our fear of living out our faith publicly is not unfounded. Rather, it is rooted in an underlying vulnerability, one that stems from how many of us have structured our lives in ways that leave us ill-prepared to take risks for the kingdom. We have grown accustomed to a version of Christianity shaped by ease and comfort, one that promises bigger paychecks, affluent neighborhoods, luxury cars, and leisurely vacations. And we have come to label these as the blessed life many believers have come to aspire to. And in many cases, this blessed life rests on a very shaky foundation, one akin to mortgaging our futures. A dynamic Proverbs 22:7 speaks to when it reminds us that the borrower is slave to the lender, a reality that becomes increasingly evident as we trade our freedom in pursuit of this version of success. In doing so, we subject ourselves to a master that demands our time, effort, and loyalty to such an extent that taking risks for the kingdom begins to feel unimaginable. There simply is little to no margin left to take even small steps of faith without fearing that the very ground beneath us might collapse. And our faith pays the heaviest price, pushed to the background whenever it contradicts culture, resurfacing only when it feels safe, when it earns applause, and shrinking back the moment it carries a cost. It is no longer a standard we live by, but an optional companion we summon when it feels convenient. The fear of challenging a culture whose tentacles reach into every part of our lives threatens to smother the flame of our desire for God. We have made ourselves friends with the world, seeking approval at the expense of spiritual potence, trading truth for acceptance, and exchanging discernment and purpose for ambition and comfort. Yet, there is no comfort greater than the freedom we find in Christ, no approval greater than His, and no higher ambition than serving Him. This freedom we have in Christ is to be jealously guarded, never carelessly surrendering it to the servitude of worldly desire and ambition. It is the greatest currency we possess, and its stewardship calls for intentionality, reclaiming control of our lives and our time, and devoting both to the one true master we serve. This means freeing ourselves from every competing demand on our time, loyalty, and commitment, intentionally delaying gratification and creating the margin to walk away from opportunities that compromise our faith, to decline demands that conflict with our convictions, to devote ourselves to mission and service, and to practice and defend our faith publicly without fear. The journey to this place calls for intentionality and restraint, a willingness to resist the constant pull of comfort, status, and consumption, and to structure our lives in a way that preserves the freedom to follow Christ wherever He leads, in convenience or in discomfort. For freedom in Christ was never meant to be traded for corruptible pleasures, but to free us for obedience. This is the calling of the disciple, to follow Christ faithfully with conviction and intentionality, in season and out of season. For if our faith is seasonal, then it was never truly anchored in Christ. It was anchored in convenience. And anything built on convenience will always collapse under pressure.